Three, two, from high atop the world headquarters of Southeastern Fly. This is the Southeastern Fly podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode. When you get a chance, text this one to a friend. It's going to be a good one. So, who are our guests today on this episode of Southeastern Fly? It's a Wisdom from the Guides episode. So, we've got a couple of folks that are going to join me and talk about this topic, which is coming quick. So, first guest is a professional guide. He fishes and guides the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Caney Fork River, Cumberland Plateau, the Clinch River, and a couple other places that he likes to keep secret for only his clients. You've heard him on a couple of Wisdom from the Guides episodes. He owns Trout Zone Anglers. His name is David Knapp. And David, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, man, I think this is going to be a really good one. You and I have some history on this particular topic, and I think some of that will come out. So our second guest majored in environmental studies with a minor in fisheries. He worked at Lake Clark National Park, working with salmon restoration. I'll get that out in the middle a minute. He is an excellent counter of fish, apparently. He did that on the Clark Lake Clark National Park up in that area. He has a decade of experience in the fly fishing industry in Tennessee. He worked at Little River Outfitters, Three Rivers in Knoxville. He currently is a general manager at Fly South. He teaches classes, casting lessons. He is the best hand-selected bucktail picker and shipper known to man. He's a carp aficionado. Please welcome to this Wisdom of the Guides episode, Andrew Smalling. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, this one's going to be a good one. So you and I don't have cicada experience together yet, but I could see us three in a boat being a whole lot of fun.
So yeah, great time.
Hopefully we can. I mean, everybody knows my schedule is terrible. So fitting a float in for me this year is going to be during the cicada season. It's going to be a little crazy, but hopefully we can get on the boat either together or maybe at different times. But so this is the Super Bowl, the playoffs, the World Series, the Masters, and the Daytona 500 all wrapped into one for fly fishing. So either you're looking forward to them, you're hearing them outside right now, or maybe you're getting swarmed by them as you mow the lawn. This episode is going to be packed with good and useful knowledge that has been tried and tested. There are no theories here, so you'll hear a lot of theories from other folks, but we're more or less, we've lived it, and it's a blast. And we wanted to help you understand it before it got here, before you got too deep into it. So these are the Cicada Diaries. So here we go. This is one of the largest fly fishing events, guys, for sure, for us. And just a little bit about last time. The first time that I caught on to it, we were on the river, and I had seen somebody tie a little cicada, or a big cicada fly. It's a bigger fly. And I tied it on my rod, on my tippet, pretty heavy tippet, and got ready to throw it out there. And my friend goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to try the cicada thing." And I threw it right in the middle. We were floating right down the center of the river. And I threw it right in the center, just straight down out of the boat. And I tell you what, when it hit the water, it disappeared. I mean, a fish ate it almost right away. It might as well have been right away. Like I had to have thrown it on that fish's head. Needless to say, he and I were in the boat. Needless to say, we just swapped that rod and that fly out the rest of the time. The whole rest of the float for 8 hours straight. All we did was threw that one fly off that one rod, and it was a blast. And it was chewed up. It had little holes all in the body, and all those little dainty Christmas tree ornament things I had, legs. One of the legs was gone. The eyeballs were ripped off of it. All the hair off the back that I had for a wing was gone. It was a mess, but it was so much fun. So I guess for me, I want to know, what do y'all look forward to the most about periodic cicadas? And for me, it's the noise, it's the excitement, it's the anticipation of that everybody gets. And but it's not the mowing, because they'll get you on the mower. That's for sure. They love the lawnmower for some reason. If I could take a lawnmower to the uh to the river and pull it behind me, I think I'd catch more fish. Swear I do. But what do you I guess, Andrew, what do you look forward to the most during the periodic cicada season?
So for me, you know, my my first shot at it was at in Brewdex, the hatch a couple years ago, and I'd been hanging around the fly shop long enough to hear a lot of the older guys who had fished it, you know, I guess 17 or 13 years ago now, talking about how good it was, and I was getting excited, and I had just decided I'm taking 5 days off. And so for me, it's a time to burn the candle at both ends, just get out there and soak it all in while you can, because it's going to be 13 or 17 years till the next one. Um, and I like, the carp just go crazy. I love carp, and it's one of the best times to target them. And I also, it's a very interesting natural phenomenon as far as, I mean, it's one of the largest insect emergence in the world. And I think that's very interesting. And it's cool to also see people getting excited for it too. People get really amped up about it, and that's awesome to see.
Absolutely. I'm booked. I don't think I
Yeah.
might have 1 or 2 days open here or there. And I know, David, you're probably booked as well. And it's nothing to do with us. Probably most every guide out there, I would say, is close to being booked or booked up, one of the two. I mean, and you don't really have to have a guide. You just, I think at this point we're kind of here to kind of with this particular hatch. It's more like, hey, cast this fly in that spot. Oh, and by the way, hang on, because it's
Yeah.
if it happens, it could be really big. It could be a big fish. But the smaller ones are just probably just as much fun, because you get to see the eats, as long as you're not dropping anything subsurface. And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. So, David, what do you think you look forward to the most?
For me, it's really just the crazy surface action because around here I guide a lot in the Smokies and the Caney Fork, the Clinch, and we really don't have just crazy banner hatches for the most part. And there's always exceptions. I've seen incredible sulfur hatches on the Clinch. I've had some good terrestrial years on the Caney, some great Quill Gordons in the Smokies or sulfurs or whatever. But day in and day out, it's not like some famous streams out west where you just have blizzards of bugs just every single day. So anytime I get extended amounts of time with just dry flies all day long for days and weeks on end, I'm just so incredibly happy. Because I'm a trout guy first and foremost. If I was out smallmouth fishing, I'd be throwing a lot more poppers and stuff and seeing those surface eats. But just I'm watching drowned bobbers every day and stuff like that, and it's cool just to fish dry flies for a month straight, basically.
Absolutely, yes. I extended it last time. I say last year, last time. I went from that day of casting that fly down the river
Mm-hmm.
in the middle, all the way through the hatch, through the dying part. You and I kind of wrapped it up with smallmouth and
Mm-hmm.
carp floats, and then I hooked the Airstream up behind the truck and drove it to Michigan and caught the hex hatch by accident.
That's awesome.
And just did the whole hex hatch hex hatch at night thing
Mm-hmm.
right after it. And I remember Evan, my guide, saying, "Man, you are tuned in, to the eats." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Dude, I've been doing this for a month straight. It's
Yep.
nothing. It's nothing I've done. It's just freaking repetition over and over,
Mm-hmm.
And it was just
Mm-hmm.
it was really good. So I've not read a lot all on the cicadas at all. So I'm pretty much going off of memory, which is which is scary. That's pretty scary now that I say that out loud. But I am going more off of memory probably than anything. Um, and Andrew, I'm gonna kick this off to you. What are some of the considerations and keys to tying the right pattern, so an angler can be successful? So we're gonna move into tying flies.
Yeah, so that was I love tying flies. So I went through a lot of different flies during the last hatch. And for me, I think one of the biggest takeaways is you can't make it too big. And I mean that in the fly can't be too big. I'm not
Right.
saying there's no limit to size. Because what I saw is a lot of those fish, even though they really want the cicada, if they can't just suck it down and get it down easy, it kind of freaks them out, you know? It's not what they're used to. So as far as materials, what I kind of stuck with was usually foam patterns, 2 mil or 3 mil foam, and I'll put super glue down as a base to keep that all touching together and sure it up. One of the things that really helped out is if you're spiral wrapping foam instead of stacking it, you can take that foam and actually squish it and make it really malleable so it won't break on you after a full day of fishing.
Right.
Um, and that helped a ton. Um, and then as far as like uh, follow the rule of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Um, the less you got going on, usually the better those flies fished. I was just wrapping 3 mil foam on a shank and then do some wings and a bullet head with some rubber legs. And that was by far the best out of all I fished. I like to kind of keep my bugs a little low riding. Those fish seem to prefer that. Um, it's easier for them to suck it down. And a lot of those cicadas, they're not like a mayfly that sits high up on the water. They're kind of sunk down in the water. They got a bit of weight to them. And then, I downsized my bugs. So in Brood X, there were some of the bigger periodical cicadas, but even then we were fishing size eights, even though most of the actual bugs were probably a 6 or a 4.
Right.
Um, and that tended to help. Fish just could choke it down real easily. Um, Playing around with hooks, we found something that's if you're targeting some of the bigger fish, you'll have to watch that. You catch enough fish that a lot of your trout style hooks will bend out after a long day. Light wire stuff, especially if they're dry fly hooks. Um, So a lot of what I tied was on like my two favorites were a Gamakatsu L11S and a T10. And the T10 it's a salmon steelhead hook. Return eye, very traditional style hook. Um, and what I liked about that is that a real long shank, it's 3x strong. It had a nice natural slope to it, kind of like a 200R. Um, and then it had an upturned eye. So if you were doing bullet head or anything with foam up near the front, that upturned eye, you could cram your thread in front of it and use it to force everything back and stay in line and not crowd the eye.
Excellent.
Um, so that was you know, just happened on that one and it worked super well.
That is good. Um, what did you use for wings?
So, I played around with that River Roads foam, uh, speckled wing, I believe it's called, and they make one it's foam sandwiched between two pieces of mottled printed color, and then there's one that's not foam. And those work well. You got to tame them. You got to put a piece of foam on top to keep those things splayed back, and
Right.
sometimes glue them down to the body because they'll want to flap and everything. Um, and those worked really well for me because I could tint them. But like Chernobyl yarn, that EP, what's it called? That EP yarn they use for Chernobyls. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That works well. Deer hair works really well too because it's durable and it's soft and floats. But um, yeah, the one big thing I will say is throw an indicator on them. If you're fishing where there's a lot of bugs,
Yeah.
our bug would get way out there and start getting mixed in with all the naturals, and you'd see a fish eat a natural, and you'd set the hook, and he had just, it wasn't your fly, and
Eat the one
so
beside it.
yeah, and
Yeah. Right.
that would get you sometimes. So always a pretty good little indicator on it.
So you're not talking about a thingamabobber. You're talking about some colored yarn or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like parapost or
Right. Okay.
um yeah, you can take those small cylinders and cut them like the foam cylinders for parachute posts and glue them on top of stuff to have them in the boat and just glue them right there with Loctite.
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want somebody to start off down the wrong road and have a thingamabobber on top of a cicada.
Hey, you could put one in front of it so you know which one's yours,
Yeah,
like a
exactly.
little leash.
Yeah, set on everything's my theory, but if you have a different color on top, that's always good. That's a good tip. Uh, David, what about you? What are your thoughts? And we'll come back to you probably on this, Andrew.
Yeah, so I had several of the same points as Andrew did. It's kind of cool to me when you get different people together that have experienced similar things, but actually haven't experienced them together, how you arrive at so many similar conclusions on things. And so, like, my very first bullet point was, I think Andrew's very first, and it was just size, just not too big. And I think people see those annual cicadas, and there are never a lot of them any given year, but they see them every year. And so they're thinking that size when they think cicadas, and the periodic cicadas are so much smaller um, than those annual cicadas. And I've kind of the same as what Andrew was saying is, like, I think if I was going to make a mistake, I would much rather be too small than too big on those. Another thing for me with the flies is I like plop, but I don't want too much plop. And I think that kind of comes from the background of, the first time that you and I did it, David, we were on the Caney for a fair amount of that. And that year, for whatever reason, we had really low flows. So we had crystal clear water pretty much anywhere you wanted to go. And it needed to fall just loud enough that a fish could find it. But I remember, some fish that we were spotting, we were leading those fish by 10 feet or more, and they would still just kind of straighten out and glide over from 10 feet away. And we weren't slamming them down. They were falling with a nice plot, but it wasn't just a real heavy, like, stone falling in the river, So kind of along with that is, I like kind of a softer foam than what some people use when I'm tying these specifically. So, like, for my normal hoppers, and stuff like that, I tie a lot of Chernobyl style stuff, and I use just cheap Hobby Lobby sheet foam. I don't get fancy with my sheet foam, but for this hatch in particular, I've really liked some of the Rainey's sheet foam. It's kind of a softer material, and it's a little thicker, so your thread really can bite into it and mold it and sculpt it to the shape that you want. And um, that, to me, that slightly softer foam kind of gives you that perfect combination of plenty of plop without too much plop, um, which is interesting because I think when we were doing our pre-discussion, if I remember right, Andrew was actually talking about how, the harder the better with the plop. So
Mm-hmm.
I think different fish, different scenarios, sometimes that stuff comes out differently, and so I don't think that's always a hard or fast rule, honestly, but that's kind of something that I noticed. Um, had strong enough hooks written down, which Andrew already did, specifically, not light wire. I mostly use Tiemco 200R hooks, but I'm also coming at it more from a trout perspective. And when I started specifically tying for bass and carp, I started thinking more in the direction of some Gamakatsu hooks and stuff. And it was just that exact thing. I want really good penetration ability on a strong hook. I don't want something that's going to bend out, because I think we've probably all been there where you've lost a good fish to a hook that's bent out. For me, it's all the time on size 18 and 20 midge hooks, and it's just the nature of fishing midges,
Yeah.
on the Clinch River or something. But don't go too light on those hooks. And something else Andrew mentioned is just, getting those flies sitting more on the surface film. So I do a lot of dubbed bodies with just foam over the back to help it kind of sit down, or I really like peacock curl bodies with the foam kind of over the back, um, as opposed to just, like, a solid foam cylinder or something, instead of, like a popper foam cylinder cut to shape, which I've seen some really cool looking ones that are tied with foam cylinders that people would tie poppers with. They look incredible, but I know they're going to sit pretty high up on the water. And something that I've seen so many times with, it could be, basically any foam fly you could imagine. I've seen big fish come up and try to eat them, and the pillow of water, when that fish's nose pops out, pushes that big foam fly away. So the more you can get that foam sitting down in the water where it's not going to push away as easily, the better. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
really good.
Yeah, something sitting in the film a little more is probably keeps it from jettison whenever they come up and hit it.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point.
Yeah. Um, Wings, I tend to go really sparse on my wings. I know you brought that up a minute ago. And I just do a little crystal flash. Like I don't do yarn, I don't do, hair, I don't do much of anything, just a little crystal flash. And like again, less is more. Like it's so easy to get, just this giant, beautiful fan of crystal flash, and the fish are going to look at it and be like, what the heck is that
Yeah,
thing?
exactly.
Just a little bit, just the illusion that there's something there is enough, in my opinion, on those. But yeah, I think that's it.
I would say also on that on the wings. Let's talk about the wings just a minute.
Yeah.
So you're gonna see when they first start coming out, you're gonna see a lot of them flying around and all that stuff. They're gonna attack you when you mow in the lawn or weed eating, all that stuff that we've talked about. But you don't even have to go to the river to find this. You just need to go find some water somewhere with a tree over it that has cicadas in it and just look in the water and see how they're riding in the water. I see a lot of things online with like spent wings, wings straight out.
Mhm.
I don't know that I saw that one time last year when they were dying. They were always laid back, uh, straight down the
Yeah.
back.
Mhm.
So, but I mean, it could be totally different this year too. I'm
So
not
along
saying
with
that I'm
that,
right or wrong. I'm just saying that some observation there's a good idea.
yeah. Along with that, I've always kind of wished, you've seen like the little wind up toys where you like wind something up and it just like makes this motion for the next minute or something.
Yeah.
I've always thought, because their wings do always lay over the back. If you could invent this fly with like a little tiny rubber band that you twist up inside, and as soon as it hits the water, it starts unloading and those wings just start kicking, man, you would just destroy fish. I don't even know how you design that thing. We need an engineer, I guess, on this discussion. But yeah, those wings lay back over it, and then they'll flutter out and kick because they're trying to get off the water, but then they'll go
Yeah.
back to that resting position over the
Yep.
back.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think
Like
David's going to be fishing a crazy crawler by the end of
I think
this.
he is too. Something's wrong with this boy. If you flip them over, the males are sometimes the body's a little shorter than the females, so that's something to consider. I think that to me gets back to Andrew's point of, and David yours as well, is let's don't. I wouldn't make them too long.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You'll be able to go outside and pick one up and look at it and go, okay, well this is probably pretty close to what's going on my body of water. So I think I might have possibly brought some in last time and just kind of like got my dimensions just right, just with one laying right beside the vise and say, okay, that's about right there. So if you're tying now, great. Or if you tied months ago, that's great. And I know some people have already started tying it up for this event, but when it comes time, don't skimp on materials and stuff and say, well, I have to go buy some more materials to tie, that size. Just it's for some, it's going to be once in a lifetime. They may be
Yeah.
fishing, getting to the end of their career or whatever fishing. So do it. But I want to go, Andrew. I want to go back to this T10. Did you say it's a T10
Yeah.
hook?
Yeah.
Who makes that?
Gamakatsu.
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 Okay. And then
Yeah.
what size do you normally use? I'm cheating here. I'm writing this down.
So, um, the ones I fished in Knoxville, were I was typically tying a size 8, and so they were fairly small, even for the big bugs that we were seeing.
Hmm.
Um, and that'll lead me into one other just touching point. But you could get away with a size either 8 or 6. You know, a 4 is doable if you really wanted something big for maybe smallmouth, something a little bit extra. But once you get up to a 2, which, that was kind of our first prototype to get enough size to play with stuff.
Yeah.
That was a little too big. Not worth casting. And
Right.
honestly, the fish couldn't quite get it in their mouth. The other thing that just reminded me of was, a lot of these bugs are black and orange on the bottom. Some are all black depending on species. And
Exactly.
I wouldn't get too caught up in that. I've seen a lot of creative stuff, and definitely having some orange doesn't hurt. But I mean,
Mhm.
I believe my bugs were all black foam with one orange rubber leg and an orange wing. And that's, once again, keeping it simple because I think once those bugs are going, they just want something kind of close and
Yeah.
they'll go for it.
Yep. Once they start falling in the water, and they fall in the water at different rates too, I think.
Yeah.
Like we talked about this the other night, early in the hatch, weren't quite as many falling in the water, and a lot of the ones that were, you know, falling in the water and thrashing around. But as time went on, they started dying off and falling in. Those were already dead probably before they hit the water shortly thereafter. So it just little things to keep in mind to make your life a little easier whenever you get on the river.
Yeah.
How about legs?
Something
Oh, go ahead, David.
I was
We'll
gonna
come
say
back
something
to that.
interesting with that size, talking about that Brood X that we had a couple years back. It's interesting you talk about them being just a little bit larger than some periodic species, because I actually had some tied from the last hatch. That's the one that's happening this year that David and I had fished years back, 13 years ago. And like the first day I went over and started fishing the Brood X, I immediately came home and tied some just a hair bigger. And it was that very thing. Like there were some, bigger ones mixed in. And I think I'd tied mostly size either eights for the one 13 years ago, or tied them on a size 6 hook, but tied them small. So the hook was a little
Yeah.
bigger to have that hook, that sticking ability, but the bug itself wasn't necessarily covering the entire hook like you might imagine. And I immediately had to go tie some slightly. And it's not, we're talking quarters of an inch at most difference. We're not talking big differences, but just a little bit bigger. And I don't know that I needed to, because I think going back to it, it's just, you get in the ballpark. If you make a mistake, go too small. But it's like, that match the hatch inside of each of us that like to tie flies. You're like, oh, I got to match that just right. I got to get the size right. Like, you got to do it just right. And that's what I found myself doing. So I think it's a big piece of fun right there.
Funny enough, David, you might not remember this, but you gave me one of those cicadas
Did
when I
I?
was working in Little River. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
I remember because the yeah, it was a real long shank hook, but he had only
Yep.
tied on like, 3/4 of the
Yep.
shank.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've got a bunch sitting here next to me, and they're all that way. I've got the back quarter or whatever sticking out of there. And it's like, I do want that hooking ability, but I really don't want that big of a bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just decided I'm going to bum flies from you two. So don't worry about it.
We got to find a way to get in a boat, even if it's not
Yeah.
during this hatch. We got to get in a boat
Yeah.
sometime. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, it will be. We need to do that for sure. What about legs? Let's go back and then we'll move on from this topic here. What about legs? What are y'all doing for legs? Anything special?
Not really. I used a variety of, just round rubber and that, I guess, silly legs, the barred, rubber legs. The one thing, if you're chasing trout, and this is something I carry over from a lot of my beetle patterns, is um, I use a lot of span flex in my beetle patterns because, especially with trout, those legs get bid on and ripped on and all that. And the rubber starts to, one comes off and the other comes off, and then they kind of flip over or something. So like
Mm-hmm.
the Spanflex, even if it gets shredded, it kind of stays together. So Spanflex works really well. And sometimes you can use the natural kinks in it to your benefit. I'll tie in 6 and then pick my best 3 and cut the rest
Right.
out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Good idea. Good tip right there. I think probably the last thing I would say is if you tie on a bug and you cast it out there and it does not settle correctly, throw it in the garbage and get out another one.
Yeah.
Don't waste time. It's a lot different than a nymph, especially if you're into Euro nymphing, that sort of thing. It's all kind of automatic on nymphing. It just, the bug's going to be down there hunting up a fish. And if it's heavy enough and on the right hook, it's going to flip over. It's going to be fine. But these things, you don't get quite the same number of shots, especially if you find a big fish and you're okay, I want to go
Mm-hmm.
try to catch that big fish. Make sure you've cast that bug out there. Make sure it's landing the way it should and it's floating at least not higher or lower, but at least flat, not landing
Yeah.
on its side every third time, because that third time is going to come up when you need it the most.
Isn't
Yeah.
that the
So,
truth?
yeah,
Yeah. And
so don't
just
skip.
not just not building up too much on the top, you know.
Exactly.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a really good point, David.
yeah, that one's I lived that one for a minute, so that was near and dear to my heart. So after we tie these things, we start getting into the presentation. And so I'm going to kind of veer off here. So what are some of the more important things to remember when you're presenting the fly to the fish? And we talked about the plop the bug. We know that the right plop, David's got a little different technique. His is a little softer, his material's a little softer. So he's thinking a little deeper than I am of I've got some I've got some 4 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 1, 2, 4, and 6 millimeter foam over here. So I'm gonna just tie up some of each and be done with it. That way I'm not wondering. But these bugs come out of the ground, so they come from a nymph, and they come from the ground. They're not coming from the bottom of the river. I know that to some, that okay, well we know that, but not everybody understands where these bugs are coming from. It's a little different than the mayflies, the cicadas, the midges. They're not coming out of the water. So if you're thinking, well, I want to fish a nymph, a big black nymph, that's fine, but they're not. Fish aren't going to be looking for them that way. Not to say that some of them might not fall in the water and not float real well and get under get pulled down into currents and that sort of thing. And there's always that fish that might be hanging in a heavy seam or something like that you might want to think about. Well, I'll just drown my cicada, or I'll just put one that doesn't float on there real well and put it in there and let the current take it down. So don't be afraid to trail a cicada that doesn't float real well behind a bigger one. I don't think that's not a bad idea. But I will say that I'm probably not going to fish any, if I can get away with fishing none of the subsurface stuff at all. I might throw a midge or something off the back of them, back off the back of one, maybe if I just want to, pick up some numbers here and there. But unless I have some reason to not fish the dry, I'm fishing the dry, for probably a month. That's my plan. Now that may go down the tubes real quick, but that's kind of my plan is to do that. But I'll probably open up my open up your cast a little bit and let it plop, let it kind of go over and come more straight down or a little more straight down if you can. Uh, but so David, what are your as far as presentation go? I know you hit on it earlier, but what are your thoughts right now?
Yeah. Um, Couple things, and I think they're kind of intertwined with each other. So like one's going to lead us to the next one. But I think just in general, just don't force your shot, especially when you're dealing with really big fish. It's the classic buck fever. Everybody's had it. If you fly fished any length of time, you see be it a 20-inch fish, or if you're at a point in your fly fishing career where a 25-inch fish is a big fish or a 30-inch fish, whatever a big fish is to you, you finally see that fish and it's eating bugs on the surface and you just lose your mind. We've all done it. That's why there's sometimes bad behavior on the water and people cut each other off, which I think we might get to later. But all that stuff happens because we lose our mind, and it doesn't really need to be that way. I think that when there's as many bugs on the water as there's going to be, if you find a big fish, unless you're on the Caney and 100 canoe flotilla is about to come through and you really only have one shot, which that could happen. I mean, let's be honest. If you only have one shot and you don't have a choice, go for your one shot. But if you have any chance at all to not force the shot, just if it doesn't feel right, back out, plan it out, do it the right way, because once those fish get happy, you've got time. You don't have to force it. If you're not at the right angle, you're not in the right position. If you cast in there and you get just horrific drag, for example, and it's just like, okay, this is not the right angle, don't make another cast. Just back out, take another shot, give it a minute to settle down and get happy again. And kind of with that last cicada hatch a couple of years ago, I was with some buddies over on Fort Loudon Lake. We were fishing, and we had caught some nice fish, some bass, some brim, a couple carp. Like it'd been a good day. And it was one of those moments where like you see the fish, there's this carp that was cruising the bank, and it was cruising straight away from us. The water clarity wasn't the best, and I kind of panicked, and I was just like, I have to hit this fish now, because if it goes down, I may not see this fish again. And it was a really big carp. I mean, we had caught some nice carp, but it was way above and beyond anything we had caught. And I made a perfect cast. I mean, this is not like a brag, but like the fly was a foot in front of this fish's nose, perfectly in line. But what I hadn't accounted for is the fish was moving straight away from me. And so the tippet is laying across the head of this fish, and it comes up to my fly. And the second that its lips bumped my tippet, the fish absolutely lost its mind. I mean, it just freaked out and it was gone. We never saw that fish again. We haunted that bank. I can't tell you how long we poked around on that bank looking for that fish again. And it was done. It was just like, no, I know where this is going. I'm not doing that. I'm done. And that fish was happy enough that if I had just held back and not pulled the trigger on that cast, I might have lost sight of it, but it almost guaranteed would have come back up again. I would be surprised if it hadn't have. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I had waited till that fish was facing the right way, that fish wanted to eat in the worst way, and it would have been my fish. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of structure. Like if I had hooked that fish, like he would have been in the net. But I screwed it up because I forced the issue. And I've been fly fishing how long? Way too long to be making goofy mental errors like that. But like we all do it, we freak out. And so just don't force that shot on your presentation. Just make it count when it needs to, and set everything up and do it right.
Couldn't agree more, as hard as it is.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Um, so like what I noticed was like kind of early on when there's just a few bugs on the waters, some of those fish can be pretty skittish. Like they're like
Mhm.
they eat one and they're like, oh, I guess that was food. They eat another, maybe we're getting somewhere. And so like early on, try and lead them, and it'll depend on what you're fishing, whether it's carp, bass, or trout. Um, just giving them a little bit room for error. Because they're kind of cautious in the beginning from what I saw at least.
Agree.
Um, and then as it gets going, those fish just, I mean, it's like eating Skittles. They just can't get enough. And so like during that time, you still got to lead them. That's the one thing that's
Mhm.
kind of surprising is you got to lead them a foot or two, because it's almost like if they don't find it on their own, then they don't quite trust it.
Yep.
So even then we were still leading them, but if there was chop or if the water was murky or something, we'd give it a little extra umph um on the plop, but it doesn't have to be anything too serious. Um, and then later on, the dead drift was definitely the way to do it. Like in that middle time when those fish are really amped up, if you plop and you see them turn to your fly, but they can't find it, maybe they don't see it, maybe they get distracted by a real one. Um, you can kind of shimmy it or twitch it or something, just to, barely twitch that rod tip. Bend the legs, as I like to say. Um, and then they'll come and find it. But later on, just don't move it. Um, and like just watch how those fish are playing out. They're eating and usually cycling or getting into a feeding pattern enough that you can watch a fish for a minute and he's going to be there. You don't have to rush, you don't have to worry. Um, and you can kind of get a feel for how those fish are feeling, and then that can make you decide how much plop, how far do I lead them, all that sort of stuff. They're generally pretty happy and they're not going anywhere. You got some time.
Mhm.
Excuse
Bless
me.
you.
Thank you. This happens every episode. I think I've done that. Gaz, if you could just take that out, that'd be awesome. Uh, so a few things I want to go back to the cast. If you're in the part of your of fishing where you're trying to gain distance, but it takes you two or three tries to get there, try not to do that. If you can move closer, move closer. Try to make that first cast count and drop it in as close as you can get it versus pick it up and cast again and pick it up and cast again to get a little closer and a little closer. I think that's important because that can be a turnoff, especially
Oh
early.
yeah.
That can be a
Yeah.
big turnoff. Uh, and
And that's just kind of a good principle in general too. Just,
yeah,
that's one thing I preach every day on my boat to people is they'll do this, pick it up, throw it out there. Oh, I didn't quite like that cast. Let me cast again. And the next cast, they might gain 4 feet from the last cast. And I'm like, unless you're getting an additional 15 feet
right.
minimum to where you touch the water, just leave it there. Even if you're fishing, sight fishing, like leave it there. I've seen so many fish come running 10 or more feet to something that plops out of the sky to see what it is. And the second you
Absolutely.
rip it out of there, everybody in there's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally
Absolutely.
agree. I think the other thing along those lines is when you get the refusal or something like that, or you're not quite far enough, and you know that and the fish doesn't eat. So this is the fish doesn't eat. I've led the fish like Andrew was talking about. I've made a good cast like David, you were just talking about. And the fish just doesn't eat, but I still, want another shot. Let that fly float down past that fish a pretty good ways. Again, this is something
Mm-hmm.
that we should be doing
Yep.
anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Let that fly and the line and everything clear that fish downstream, and then come back and set yourself up and get yourself ready and try again if the fish is still there, or you think it's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great practice in general, but a a really good point on that. And you made me think of something like they're like, putting it down and trying to go 5 feet farther. Um, you know, during this event, like we'd have times where you drop a fly down and it just wasn't the cast. You're like, oh man, I kind of missed that fish. And you would go to pick up and you'd pick it up. And then either the fish you were casting at or another fish would then
Mm-hmm.
show up looking around where your
Mm-hmm.
fly just was like, hey, I heard one. Where is it?
Yeah,
So like in this, it's, if it lands, it lands. Leave it there for a minute.
yeah, because you never know who's going to show up. You
Yeah.
really don't know what's just lurking down there. And I would say on the presentation. So, David, this goes back to one of our last trips
Mm-hmm.
before I went to Michigan for a week. Um, on carp, it it felt like if you threw right in front of the fish, even if you let it, by a foot or so,
Yeah.
if you threw right in front, these fish were coming upstream and they were carp and they were just cruising the banks is all they
Yep.
were doing, just so you can get a kind of lay of the
And
land.
in clear water too, which I
Yeah,
think is important to this where you're going. I think you're
yeah,
going where I think you're going.
yeah. It was
Yeah.
crystal clear.
Yeah.
That whole summer it was that way.
Yeah.
But so I would throw right in front of them a foot, like right in line with them, and the fish would just swim under,
Yep.
right under the fly and keep on going. But if you threw a foot ahead of them and a foot to either side of them,
Yep.
that fish would keep on trucking and then it would turn and it would
Yep.
come up and eat that fly. It was almost like, their eyes aren't set to where they could see right in front of them, or they weren't eating anything head on because maybe they've seen so many. I don't know what the thing was, but that happened all day long. It was
Well, I
just,
specifically remember one of the fish, and it might have actually been the first carp that I actually hooked and landed that day. But I specifically remember watching that fish. And as it worked along the bank, it was cruising in a straight line, but the naturals that it was eating, it was veering off
yeah,
left and right to eat. So the general trend was a straight line, but every time it would eat, it was almost always a turn to the left or a turn to the
yep.
right for whatever reason. I guess just the naturals aren't, lined up perfectly in a buffet line on the top of the river, but that image, that video is it's just like seared into my brain. And I just remember, and I remember putting that fly, and it was 5 or 6 feet ahead of the fish. I mean, I actually didn't make that great of a cast, but it was a little offline and it was a little farther ahead than I wanted it to be. But like that fish kind of was going one way and then it just kind of turned and straightened out and just glided over to the fly. And I'm with you. Like we put so many flies where they should have been right on the fish's
Oh
head, and
yeah.
they didn't want them there at all.
Nope.
And I think to me, that's a major difference, which we might get into a little later even more, but just between the water types, just because that water was so clear. I think when the water is a little more stained, like true warm water scenarios, sometimes if you are too far off, they don't find it, you know?
Yeah,
So I think it's so specific to individual fish. Some of that's just watching those fish work and say, okay, what does this fish want? Where, you know, how's this fish feeding?
exactly. That's so true. So true. Another thing you probably need to watch. I don't want to get I don't want to get so far into the backing that we take all this time to talk on this subject. Okay, just let me say that right now. Uh, but I'm going to go back to everybody is losing their minds. I mean, you're going to do a lot of things wrong. Your casts are going to be short, long. Fly's not going to flip over. But one of the things you don't have to do, and we're all guilty of this at one point or another. Sometimes multiple times a day, and sometimes you do something wrong. You don't mean it, but just for instance, so we were on the trout water last time, and I was set up on anchor, and we were pulling the anchor up and moving down about, maybe a rod length at a time, and then we would stop, put the anchor down, pull it off the bottom, float a little bit. We were creeping down this bank, and it's a well-known river. And I was watching this fish, which at the time I thought was a huge fish. And we were headed toward it, and I said, "All right, pull the anchor up. Let's make one more move down about a rod length or a rod length and a half." And we made that move, and I said, "I think I can float this cicada right down to that fish, right where it needs to be." I wasn't paying any attention whatsoever to anybody else on the river. I mean, we were focused on one fish and catching that one fish. And these two guys in a canoe, fly fishermen, cut right in front of us. Like I could have reached out of the front brace and tapped them on the head with my fly rod and casted that fish and put it down. Don't be that guy. Just please don't do that. But what are so that's my it's been done to me, so I don't want to do it to anybody else. I'm going to try to go behind you if I can. I'm going to try not to row through your water if I have to go in front of you. I'm going to try to do all those things. I'm going to try to wait on you to get out of the way, whenever I see a fish. I'm not going to run right in front of you and you be able to tap my boat with your fly rod. That's not going to happen because it's been done to me. But with everybody losing their minds during this hatch, what are some of the things y'all to remember about etiquette? Andrew?
Yeah, I think the big thing, and this just goes for in general, but keep it in mind while you're out fishing, during this hatch is just go talk to people, and also in that, if you're trying to talk to people, be mindful in that they're fishing. Like if you're in a boat, you don't want to just motor up to them, or if they're out wading, don't tromp out there and tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, bud." Uh, but a lot of times if I see guys, rigging up rods or in the parking lot or something like that, um, I'll just ask them like, "Hey guys, where do you plan on fishing?" And then, try and work something out. Okay, I'll go above you or I'll go below you.
Mhm.
And just, a lot of times that eliminates a lot of your problems right off the bat, just that simple conversation. Um, if I'm floating down and I see a boat, um, I'll try and, at least get within, talking distance. And I don't want to crowd them either. They might be
Yeah.
on a fish. Um, and I'll just say, hey, you know, kind of what's your plan of attack? Okay, I'll go back up and either, start above you or, and they might just say, oh, we're just fishing, right? We're fishing these trees and then we're motoring out or keeping on going. It's like, okay, let me pop down, 300 yards or, and that typically, you know, release or eases a lot of tensions. And also like, I find that if you're willing to show people some of that respect, a lot of times they give you some grace and they'll show you respect back. They don't just tell you to pound salt, as long as you're willing to talk to them. Um, and then the other thing that comes to my mind is if you want to be in a spot, somebody's there, the early bird gets the worm.
Man,
And
Yep.
if you didn't get there to get the worm, be an earlier bird.
Yep.
And that can help you out a lot. You know, if you are dying to go fish this one spot, you know, make sure you're there. That might mean getting there at 4 a.m. and sleeping in your car, but that'll ensure you get to fish it.
I have done that before. Been the first one there to in Michigan, salmon fishing, and our
Yeah.
guide said, if you see headlights coming through the woods, that's the Rod and Gun Club, and they're going to come down here and try to get this shoal. So if you see headlights coming through the woods, jump out and just stand on the shoal there and look at them and point your headlight at them, and they'll go away. And that's exactly what happened. But we were there. Yeah, we were there an hour and a half probably before sun up, which is fine. You know, I'm cool with it. We sat and shot the bull, and then they came down and we jumped out and stood in the river and they left. And they just went around the corners, all they did. They didn't go far. But yeah, go early or go late. Go when either
Yeah.
is good, you know.
Yeah, and I guess don't hog a spot. Like I don't mean that to sound like, you know, get in a spot and stay there because you showed up at 4 a.m. all day. You know, there's plenty of fishing and plenty of bugs. So, you know, give other people their swing too. You know, go have a lunch break or something, or keep on going after you've had your fill and let those people have their turn too.
You'll make a lot of friends out there doing that, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
How about you, David? What are your thoughts on this subject?
I had a lot of similar thoughts jotted down in my notes. And I think the only other thing I would add to it, it's just kind of more like a summary statement, is just the classic do unto others, just, how would you want someone to deal with you if you were in the position, if you see someone in front of you, or if you see someone there ahead of you or whatever, just do the same thing. And, definitely what Andrew was saying, communication is just super crucial. And, usually 95% of the time will earn you friends. There's always going to be that one cranky person out there that's going to say
Oh,
bad, mean, horrible things to you or about you, no matter what you do.
right.
But most times you're going to actually end up probably making a friend, if nothing else. So I think just talk to people while you're out there nicely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, when I first started fishing, we fished in the Smokies quite a bit, and I've talked about my friend Pat and I, and we were up on a well known, very well known stream, and there was enough spot to park 2 or 3 cars there, and enough space. And when we got out, another guy drove up, and we were putting our stuff on, and he said, "Hey, which way are y'all fishing, up or down?" And we said, "Well, we were going to go up." He said, "Well, I'll go down and start from here. I'm just going to park here, but I'll walk down." And he did. He walked on down, and he was going to work his way back to his car. Is basically what he's doing. We were working our way from the car on up, and we didn't see him when we got back. We went and grabbed a bite to eat, and then I thought, you know what, we're right by Little Rivers. Let's run Little River. Let's run in there and find something to spend our money on. And he was in there. We had a nice conversation with the guy because we had just got off the river. Basically just finished 2 or 3 hours before that talking to him. Probably a little longer than that, but it was like, oh well, hey, here's this guy. He's getting out of his Land Cruiser, and oh okay, well, hey, how'd you do? Of course, that's the number one question we're going to all ask. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so I lied. I told him I did really good, but and I didn't. But I'm kidding. I don't remember what I told him, but I do remember that. Hey, that was pretty cool. He
Yeah.
was a nice
Yeah.
guy when he first drove up. I was like, well, crap, here's somebody to get my water. I'm gonna do
Yeah.
something. And then he asked. I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just something to keep in mind. And the trout streams are going to be pretty heavily fished. So you're going to have some challenges there, but uh, I want to move into non-trout. Um, so what species of interest might folks consider during the hatch, and would you do anything different for those from those different species? And Andrew, I know you love carp, and I know you're waiting to talk about it. And
Absolutely.
so let's start with you.
Yeah. Man, oh man, the warm water species that you can target on cicadas is unimaginable. Um, you know, just about everything that swims in one of these rivers or lakes are gonna eat them. Like I was seeing drum and catfish, and you'll even watch an occasional skipjack run up and eat one. Uh, and honestly, that kind of keeping something in mind is that kind of opens a large array of things you can do. This kind of dawned on us on our last cicada hatch. Um, and I'll start with smallmouth. Smallmouth, ton of fun. Um, but one thing that was interesting is we weren't catching a lot of smallmouth on straight up cicadas. We'd have one or two poke out here and there, and eat a dead drifted cicada or twitch cicada. But just because you're fishing cicada hatch doesn't mean you have to fish only cicadas. And what we kind of learned is, fishing black poppers or a black wiggle minnow on a floating line, or we fished a lot of like diving frogs, like deer hair diving frogs for smallmouth, and they ate those a lot better than the cicadas. And we think it was just they were looking up, they were ready for them. We don't know why they weren't maybe eating those cicadas as much as we thought they would, but we caught some of our best smallmouth of the year on diving frogs and other, you know, popper like imitations. But the for me the carp is just, oh man. Um, yeah, the carp's awesome because they're one of the fish that I feel like really figures it out.
Yes.
They're quick to get on them. And they once they get going, those carp hunt for them. They'll
Mhm.
swim for inches under the surface, sometimes by themselves, sometimes in groups of six, just prowling for cicadas. And they'll get so stuffed. I mean, their scales are almost popping out. Uh, and yeah, and it's one of those. It's you can catch as many as you want, especially on the lake. They're easy to access. The other thing we've talked about, and I want to see if it happens, is you'll have a lot of bait fish species that are kind of keyed in on these and getting kind of reckless. And so one thing I want to see is if that makes things like striper, big bass fishing easier because now their prey is not paying attention. Um, so we'll have to report on that one next year. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, the carp, I mean, usually we'd fish 0x, standard about 15-pound test.
Yeah.
We were having to go to 20-pound test fluorocarbon and eight weights. And it took us about six fish on 0x breaking off immediately before we were like, all right, let's go to 20-pound. But it's awesome.
Yeah. There's really nothing like the carp bite. Uh, we fished 5 weights and 6 weights and just had them bent double and just, all right, let's just see how much they can take it. We didn't break a rod or anything, which is a miracle. Didn't break a line, didn't break a rod, but uh, on one trip, I think it was with David. I'm pretty sure it was him. I had asked him. I said, "Hey, do you how big is that fish?" Because his rod, it was you because I remember where we were now. His rod was bent double, and I said, "Are you? Is there a warranty on that rod?" And he was like, "I don't remember if he said yes or no, but he followed up with, I don't care."
Yeah,
That fish had that
that
rod
was a
bent
big
double.
that was a big fish too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the reel screaming.
Yeah.
Most of the fish would eat. You'd set the hook, and they just take off like
Oh yeah.
across the river
Yeah.
almost every time. Some would just lay down and hunker down and just sit there and mope around. But the majority had enough energy in them to where like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm taking your fly and all your line to your back and with you. So
Yeah.
we
I
didn't really do a ton of smallmouth fishing. So I'm going to take your diver, your frogs and stuff like that. I'm going to take that to heart because I've got some smallmouth in carp water that I'm going to be going to for folks. So I'm going to take some of that with me. They don't want to get on the they don't really want to get on the trout water because they're afraid it's going to be so packed. But
yeah.
they want to do something a little different. So I will I may I'll go back and listen to this and jot down my notes from what you had told us about the frogs and stuff, the diving stuff. So the question I do have is, will striper eat them?
Hmm.
Probably. I think the smaller ones probably will, but I mean, I'm talking about the bigger ones. And will muskie eat them?
Mhm.
Those are the two that I'm just wondering about. If muskie, who knows what I mean, it could be a day to day thing. They may not eat anything for 3 days and eat all of them they can get their mouth on for one day. So you don't ever know about them. I don't know if, I guess you could find a pattern. If they're eating, you could find a pattern, but if they're not, it'd be difficult too. But what about you, David? What are you considering?
Yeah, so I'm definitely probably most excited about carp on this hatch as well. Like I love trout, and I'm looking forward to catching a great big old brown trout or a great big rainbow on a cicada. But I think more than anything, I just look forward to the carp, and that's not to discount the bass and the panfish because I love all that stuff too. I mean, some of the bigger bass that I've caught and that I've had clients catch have come during periodic cicada hatch. But I think for me, one of the big considerations with those fish is like, where are you finding them? So one thing I remember very specifically during the last 13 years ago, the last time this hatch came off on the Caney, I could wade, let's say Happy Hollow, just, or Betty's Island, wherever it is. And I could pitch a cicada right out dead middle of the river and it would drift 20 feet and a big fish would eat it, nowhere close to the bank, nowhere close to huge numbers of these bugs, and a fish would eat it. And something that really stands out to me from that day, you and I keep kind of referring back to kind of towards the end of that hatch. You might have to correct me, but I don't remember a single one of the carp that we caught or saw that was more than probably 15 feet off of a bank. They were all in proximity to a bank.
Yeah, they were.
And that's something that, the Brood X that happened a couple of years back, I was doing all that on the lake. And that's the biggest thing to me that was really important is the fish that you're going for, where are they going to be at in the water, and where do you need to fish? And with warm water, everything we did was on the banks on those lakes. And a lot of that's just because there's not current to grab those bugs and drag them out into the middle of the river like there is on, say, the Caney or the Elk or some of these rivers. Whereas on the Caney, a fish can fall in off of a good bank, and the next thing you know, if it hasn't been eaten fast enough, that current's going to kick it out into the middle, and it's helplessly drifting down the middle. On a lake, unless you have a really good wind blowing one way or another, there's not really going to be current to push those bugs really strongly away from those banks. And so, I remember we found a tree, and we kind of had it in our back pocket on Fort Loudon because we would just kind of cover banks and we would find fish all up and down the banks, but it wasn't because there was huge numbers of bugs all up and down these banks. But we found one tree. It was like the tree,
Yeah.
and if we were running a trip over there, or if we were just fun fishing and we were having a hard day, it was like, okay, we know we can go to this tree and we're just going to catch, a carp, a huge bass, a giant panfish, like something good's going to happen under this tree. But it was literally a 30-foot radius. Like it was just right there. Those bugs weren't going anywhere. The tree was loaded. I mean, the tree was just covered in cicadas, and different fish would kind of cycle in and out eating these bugs as they would fall out. But that was it. They weren't going anywhere. It was the tree. So if you're chasing warm water fish or something not in moving water, and that's something I always have to kind of recalibrate my brain to, because I'm a moving water fisherman first and foremost, but you like find those spots. And as long as you're not being rude, like we talked to a minute ago, you need to spend your time there and let someone else have it. Like, don't be afraid to camp out there. If you find the spot and you're chasing carp or bass or whatever, like stay there and fish that spot, because you're going to have all kinds of fish just cycle through there over time.
Absolutely, you will. You just said
I think the other thing I had
point.
jotted down, like as a consideration specifically with carp eat so deliberately that even knowing that carp eat deliberately, I still miss a lot of carp. And it's because I'm a Smoky Mountain fisherman first and foremost. So my hook set, if anything, is just way too fast, even for like a standard, Caney Fork trout eating a nymph or something. Like I have to purposely dial it back even for that, but with carp, it's just a whole nother world of just slowing everything down, waiting for the mouth to close, waiting for that fish to turn. And you have to go into it prepared for that. Otherwise you're going to rip it out of that fish's mouth every single time, because, you see that nose just start to break the surface and you're ripping it back. It's you're never gonna catch that fish. Just
Yeah.
just be patient. Be patient.
Let them go under.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
waiting
Yep.
for them to go under the
Yep.
water. That's,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
that's
Turn that
great
head
advice.
all the way down. Yep.
Absolutely. So that brings us honestly to the next question about the one that got away. Mine in this case, the two that got away from me were the first two carp that I tried to set the hook on. I didn't realize how slow they were. So they start their move from wherever they are. It may take them a second to travel to the fly, and then they start their move up, and they basically have to get most of their whole head up out of the water, to get the fly, and then they have to eat, and then like Andrew, you said, go back under. I didn't realize that if you have a pre-made sandwich, you can walk back to the cooler from the time that you present that fly. You can go back and get that sandwich out, unwrap it,
Yeah.
take a bite, wrap it back up, and lay it down before you set the hook. I mean, that's
Yep.
literally what it
Yeah.
felt like on the first two fish, and it was just, I'd been trout fishing for however many years I had been trout fishing, and anything on top was, if it hits, especially in the Smokies where I really learned, was if it hits, just set the hook,
Yep.
not wait. Don't go to the cooler. Don't do any of that. You've got to set it right away. And now you have to switch gears in your mind and say, all right, I have to make sure this fish eats before I rip the fly out of its mouth. And there's all the water that it's pushing leads you to believe that it's eaten. That fish is all right. It had to have eaten because all that water is moving around it, and that's not
Mhm.
always always true in the case of a carp. A trout's probably a little different. They're a little quicker. They can get there a little quicker. They can eat a little quicker, but a carp really has to, like David, it's intentional. Like David was saying,
Yeah.
they're
Mhm.
very intentional about what they do and how they do it. And I don't know if they're, trying to keep their balance or what they're doing, but it's definitely different for me. So that's kind of the one that got away. Um, and so, Andrew, tell me about the one that got away for you.
Funny enough, I've been thinking about this over the week, and I don't really have a one that got away from the last cicada hatch, but I thought it was going to be the one that got away. Um, and what it was is we were, taking 5 days off to cicada fish. I was ready, and we were fishing carp, and we were catching so many fish in the French Broad, catching so many 30-inch carp that if it wasn't 33, 34, 35, we were just pitching them back. Um,
Yep.
no pictures, no nothing, just on to the next one. And we were rolling down this bank. We decided to smallmouth fish for the start of the morning. And I was throwing a Dahlberg diving frog. And we were coming down through some current, and I was facing left, and off my right side, I could hear this slurping noise. And I was like, that's really odd. And I turned and looked, and there's this log, about as big around as a dinner plate, not too big. And it had this bow in it that went up onto the bank. And so half of it was out of the water, and it kind of slipped down into the water. And these cicadas had washed down the river and had found that log and started crawling up on it. It was just
Mm.
covered in them.
Mm.
Mm.
And the slurping noise I was hearing was a carp that had found them, and he was actually kind of wedging his body onto the log and shimmying up to where about three-fourths of him, or about one-fourth, sorry, about a quarter of him was out of the water, and he was sucking these cicadas off what could be considered dry land. And then and we just anchored the boat, and I was like, this is amazing.
Yes.
And he eventually he did this thing where he kind of swam up and like wedged himself over the log, because I had a real gentle incline on it, and kind of wedged himself over this log and knocked a bunch of them off. So like at one point all of his body had touched air, as he
Wow.
kind of slithered over it. And uh and then he came around and started eating those
Mm.
cicadas, and all I had was my Dahlberg diving frog in my hand, and I pitched it over to him, and he came after it like he knew what to do. And he hit that fly sideways at first, and didn't like it. He freaked out. And so he went back around, and then I just gave it one more twitch, and he came right back, and he came from the back, and suck that frog down.
Mm.
And it was probably one of my heavier carp. He wasn't very long per se for how heavy this fish was, but I could hear, I was fishing a 7 weight, and I could hear the ferrules in my rod actually starting to kind of creak and crack. I was really thought I was going to break this rod. Um, and yeah, I'm more surprised I landed that fish than I didn't, you know?
A fish sucking cicadas off a log. Can you imagine how good they must taste?
Oh,
Mm.
I know.
It's like putting cheese doodles on a log and saying, David, if you can get them, you can have them. And
Yeah.
I'm going to work extra hard for that. They must really, I'm going to have to eat one and see. They're probably bitter as they can be.
Oh yeah, that I
I'm
couldn't
sure.
imagine.
Yeah, bitter and crunchy, but hey, they may be really good. You never know.
Yeah.
Something's up with them. I mean, they have to taste okay because they really go after them. How about you, David?
I mean, I thought about that for a while too, and really the only one that came to mind for me was the one I already shared. With that big carp that I essentially lined, but it was with tippet, but I essentially lined the fish, and it that that's I think to me the thing that appeals to me so much about carp is just how smart they are. Like the story that Andrew just shared, like that's something that fish has been like thinking about that. That fish isn't just like, oh, hey, maybe if I wallow on this log, maybe some cicadas will fall off. Like this fish has been studying this problem.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about carp. And that, to me, I tell people all the time, I could tell stories probably all day about big fish I've landed, but it's those ones that got away that keep me coming back. And like right now going into this current hatch this year, the one that's keeping me going back is that carp that I had come up. Its lips touched the tippet. I mean, it was a half inch from the fly. I mean, it was on the fly, and all I had to do was just suck it in, and instead it just bolted.
All right.
And that is what's keeping me coming back for this hatch. I got to go find my next giant carp.
Exactly. That is so true. I think more about the two I lost and probably tell that
Yep.
story more.
And all the big ones you landed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yep.
The
Yep.
one that sticks out is the one that the first one I landed because it
Yeah.
was like, hey, wait a minute, what just happened here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But the two carp really keep coming to mind, and you'll get chances at stuff that you'll see fish that you didn't know were there,
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
not
Big
just
grass
carp.
carp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big
Yep.
grass carp, but just wherever you fish, you'll be like, I'll be darned, I didn't know there was a big fish
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
in this river that big or this many.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it was this many big fish in the rivers that I
Yeah.
was fishing. I knew
Yeah.
that there's probably one or two around, but I didn't
Yep.
realize that there's a whole lot more than one or two around at that time. And the rivers are cycled now, in the 13 years. So my hope is they're cycling. They seem to be cycling back up to
Mm-hmm.
some better, healthier fish. So hopefully, as we come off of winter, and then the rainbows will be uh, spawning, and buffalo will be spawning, and maybe that'll keep them going and keep them all healthy, so that when the cicadas do get here, they'll just cycle right through those just like they have been. So that
Mm-hmm.
would be a good thing. So, any closing words of wisdom from either of you to maybe a new angler?
Um, just get out. You just gotta go. Spend your time on the water. Um, and for me, that's really what I've kind of boiled it down to. And for I guess a lot of younger people, and I'm kind of on that cusp you know, um, of like, you can watch all the YouTube you want and try and learn that way. And it definitely can teach you things. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
Oh
trying to
yeah,
disparage it at all. Um, but you learn tenfold just being outside. So you just got to go. And even if it's just sitting on the river, like one of the smartest fishermen I know is a kid I've met um, on one of the rivers I fish, and he every day after work he just goes and he'll take a lawn chair and just sit at the river, and he knows more about the fish in that river than anybody around. So you just got to get out.
absolutely, David.
I think the only thing I can think of beyond just getting out is don't make the mistake I did when I first started fishing cicadas. I don't know if you remember, David, but the first time we got out there, like all I had on hand, like my heaviest tippet was 4X. I mean, I was a Caney Fork midge trout fisherman, and 4X was like, rope to me at the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I was fishing like that whole first day on 4X. And like, I remember at one point you kind of looked over and like, what are you fishing there? I was like, I'm on 4X. And you're like, 4X. And like don't do that. Like, be prepared. There's so much information out there. Like, go to a fly shop, go to Fly South, talk to Andrew, like talk to
Yeah.
somebody that's been there, none of that. There's not really, in this day and time, with so much out there in terms of ability to get knowledge, there's not really an excuse to just show up out there with no clue. So go find out what you really need. Don't be out there in this hatch with the wrong stuff. Like, have the right things, have the right tools, and then beyond that, just time on the water is what's going to bring it all together.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more on both of those points, and Andrew, yours as well. I think I would say don't be afraid to go a mile down the road from your house and fish.
Yep.
Even if
Hey.
it's just a small creek, go in it, because there's a place that's 5 miles from my house. It's a pretty good size. It's a smaller river, but it's pretty good size. Lots of bass, lots of smallmouth, lots of carp. I don't fish it, but you can bet that if I get home from a trip and want to go fish for something, I can grab a rod, throw it in the truck, take off over there, fish for a couple hours and be back home. Almost
Yeah.
in time for dinner, or I can grab something on the way. But yeah, Andrew, like you said, the more time on the water, the better, and you don't have to make it. Doesn't have to be all out adventure to go catch a fish during this time, and you'll learn.
Yep.
You'll be surprised at what you learn just sometimes just being out there for a couple hours,
Mhm.
and don't be afraid to sit on the riverbank and watch before you step in the water, because
Yep.
you'd be surprised
Yeah.
at what you'll find out, just like you were just talking about. Well, what do y'all say we close out this show? It's been about an hour or so, something like that, probably. So, who are our guests on this Wisdom from the Guides episode? Where can you find them? Our first guest is the general manager at Fly South. He teaches classes, casting lessons. He is, as I said, the best hand selected bucktail picker and shipper dude in the country. Andrew, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, David. Yeah, this is great. Really appreciate it.
Good deal, man. I'm glad to have you. And we'll have you back for some other stuff too. Our other guest, our second guest here was David Knapp, and David fishes and guides the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Caney Fork River, Cumberland Plateau, the Clinch River, and some other area rivers. He's the owner of Trout Zone Anglers. You can find him at troutzoneanglers.com. David, appreciate you showing up and walking us through some of these different situations, and hopefully helping some of these folks out. It was good to reminisce about 13 years ago. I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, but I can remember what happened 13 years ago and where we caught all those fish and how much fun it was. So thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and hope we get out on the water sometime soon.
Yeah, we need to get a boat together is what we need to do, all three of us.
Yep. That'd be a great
Yeah.
time.
You just listened to Andrew Smalling and David Knapp on Southeastern Fly, the Cicada Diaries. See you next time.